Peace be upon you and welcome to a new episode. My name is Amr. On the 21st of September, 2024. A young man left his house to meet some friends, but his family waited for him to return in the evening, but he didn't come home at all. Initially, they thought he was late because he was with some friends, but when they tried to contact him by phone, he didn't answer them at all. The matter was painful for them, but even more painful was that his car had completely disappeared, and none of his family members found any trace of him when they went out on the road or went to search for him at his friends' houses. At that point, they decided to go and inform the police to find out where their son had gone. When the police received the report, the matter was very alarming for them. Not because this young man had disappeared, but because there were 3 other reports with almost the same descriptions, similar to this young man, of people from wealthy families who had cars and very expensive possessions with them. They had also disappeared without a trace. The question now is there a link between the 4 missing people, or is the matter purely coincidental? Get ready, because you will hear the story of perpetrators who were dubbed the modern-day Raya and Sakina, but in my opinion, they surpassed Raya and Sakina, because the actions they committed were completely unexpected by anyone. To find out what the story is, follow the video to the end. The events of our story take place in Algeria, specifically in the province of Mascara. There lived a young man named Abdelnour, and he was 29 years old at the time of the incident. Abdelnour came from a well-off family and lacked nothing in his life. Throughout his life, he lived with his father, mother, and siblings, and his life from a young age was decent and stable. Abdelnour enrolled in university, and after he graduated and obtained his degree, he decided to work in the contracting field. It is clear that his family worked in the same field. Abdelnour came from a wealthy family, and in addition, his work provided him with a respectable income, which meant his financial affairs were going very well. He owned his own car, his phone was the latest model, and he always wore very expensive clothes. Even Abdelnour, because he didn't marry at a young age, decided to enjoy his life as much as possible. He used to travel with some of his friends on trips, and always liked to spend time with his friends and go out with them as much as he could. The situation remained the same until we reached the date of September 21st, 2024. On this day, Abdelnour left the house and told his family that he was going to meet some of his friends and that he would return home in the evening. However, when the time came for him to return home and he hadn't returned, some of his family members began to try to contact him by phone. But at that time, they were surprised that his phone was switched off. They waited for some time, and then they decided to go out on the road and see his car. Perhaps it had broken down or he had been in an accident, for example. But there was no trace of his car, and this made them unusually worried. Abdelnour's family at that time decided not to waste time, and went to the police station and filed a report that their son was missing, that the circumstances of his disappearance were very strange, and that no one was able to contact him. As soon as the police received the report, they began to move immediately. And this was because this was not the first report they had received about an adult who had completely disappeared and whose family could not find any trace of him. The people who were disappearing were always from wealthy families, with their cars, their phones, and money with them. You could say, in short, that they were tempting targets. The report submitted by Abdelnour's family was the 4th report submitted to the police station about the disappearance of a young man aged between 25 and 30 years. The possibility that the police officers considered at that time was that there might be someone targeting these people in a specific way. The idea that they had money and cars could be the reason behind their disappearance, motivated by theft. At that time, the police officers began to follow a different approach because they had found no trace of Abdelnour or any trace of his car. They began to track his phone signal. His phone was switched off, and they were unable to locate him. Here, they decided to review the phone records and see what calls he had made or messages he had received during the period before his phone was switched off. Indeed, there was a number contacted him by phone for the last time, and after that, the phone was completely switched off. The police officers were suspicious of this number. They began to look for its owner because surely the key and solution to the puzzle might be with him. The police officers were able to identify the name of the young man who owned the number, and his name was Tariq. While they were trying to track him, they learned that he also lived in the same province. They decided to go to him, take him to the police station, and investigate him to find out what his relationship was with Abdelnour, and what transpired between them in the last call before Abdelnour's phone went off. The possibility that the police officers considered at that time was that Abdelnour and Tariq might be friends, for example, and that Abdelnour might have told Tariq where he was going before he disappeared, so he could give them any information through which they could reach him. However, as soon as they asked Tariq about his relationship with Abdelnour, he told them at that time that he had no relationship with him and that he did not know anyone by that name. The police officers were very surprised. They began to say to him, "How can you not know him? The last call made from his phone was to your number, so how was he calling you before his phone was switched off? And how do you have no idea who he is or have never known him?" At this time, when the police officers confronted Tariq with these matters, some signs of nervousness began to appear on him, as if he was hiding something. The police officers here began to press him with questions to get a confession from him. But Tariq at that time began to make statements, and then retract them, change his words, and then say new things. When they asked him a question, he would start to add details and reduce details, and all these things, as you know, are evidence that he was not telling them the truth. The police officers at that time decided to pressure Tariq with all their might to get a confession from him. After intense pressure and being cornered with questions, Tariq decided to confess to them. Of course, the questions the police officers wanted answers to were how, where, why, and whether Abdelnour was still alive or not. Tariq said that he and Abdelnour had met on Facebook because Tariq was displaying some goods, such as phones and watches imported from abroad, and Abdelnour wanted to buy some of these goods from him. They agreed to meet so that Tariq could take him to the place where he sold all the goods he brought from abroad. When the police officers asked Tariq where Abdelnour was now, Tariq replied that Abdelnour was at his sister's house. The police officers didn't understand what he meant by "at his sister's house," and asked him what Abdelnour was doing at his sister's house, and what her relationship was to the matter at all. Tariq began to explain to the police officers that Abdelnour was no longer alive, and in fact, his life had been ended, and that he was currently buried in the land of his sister's house. Of course, the police officers couldn't believe any of what Tariq was saying. In fact, they hadn't expected to hear such a confession from him. At that time, they had some doubt that Tariq might be misleading them, and just saying anything, and then he would retract his words so as not to tell them the truth. They decided to dispel any doubt with certainty. They took Tariq and made him lead them to his sister's house, and they went there to make sure whether Abdelnour was actually buried in her yard, or whether this talk had no basis in truth. At the time the police officers arrived at Tariq's sister's house, no one was home. Tariq began to lead the police officers to the area where Abdelnour's body had been buried. They began to dig there to make sure whether he was telling them the truth or not. The police officers were digging in the living room of the house, and the floor in front of them was a concrete floor. When they removed all the concrete and began to dig underneath, they indeed found something that was wrapped in a sack. When they began to open it, they found a human body inside, and they were very likely that this body belonged to Abdelnour. The police officers at that time took Tariq into custody and sent him to the police station to find out exactly what was happening in this house and what his sister's relationship was to the matter, whether she was aware of his actions or whether he was using her house and doing all these things behind her back. On the other hand, the body found in the floor of the house was transferred to the forensic medicine department to have a medical report issued to determine the cause of death and to take a DNA sample from the body, in addition to a DNA sample from Abdelnour's family, and to verify through it whether the body belonged to him or to someone else. Tariq, from the beginning of the interrogation, and without any pressure on him, felt that the matter had been exposed and that he had to tell the whole truth. He said to the police officers that he was the one who lured Abdelnour until he reached his sister's house, and when the police officers asked him who his sister was and what her relationship was to the matter, he told them that his sister's name was Khaira Amar al-Jalali, and that he had lured Abdelnour by telling him that he had some imported goods from abroad, and that these goods were in his sister's house, and that his sister was the one who would sell him these goods. And that's why Abdelnour went with him to the house. When they asked him what made things escalate to the point of ending his life, he said that from the beginning, he and his sister were luring victims to the house to end their lives and then seize their belongings. They were targeting certain people who were clearly wealthy, with cars and money, so that they could benefit from the situation as much as possible. When the police officers began to investigate Kyra to understand the aspects of her life, they learned that she was 28 years old at the time of the incident, and that she was active in a charity organization and did some good deeds. They also learned that she was married to a man named Belker, who was 46 years old at the time of the incident. Tariq said that his sister's husband, Belker, worked as a real estate broker, in addition to some other jobs. He said that he and his sister Kyra had been married for about 9 years, and that they had lived in the house that was the scene of the crime since the beginning of their marriage. When they asked Tariq if Belker was also involved in the matter, Tariq stated to them that Kyra and Belker were both part of a gang, and that they were the ones who drew up the plan that Tariq would execute by luring the victims to them. While Tariq was giving his confessions, he clarified to the police officers from the context of his words that there was a fourth person who witnessed the incident and saw Abdelnour being killed and buried in his sister's house. When they asked him who the fourth person was, he said that it was his mother and Kyra's mother. Tariq said that he and Abdelnour entered the house in a completely normal manner, and as soon as they entered, Belker, Tariq and Kyra attacked him, and then they ended his life. They dug a hole in the floor of the house, and then buried him, and all these things were witnessed by their mother. What was striking to the police officers was that when they entered the house and began to dig in the ground, there was no smell, even though Abdelnour had entered a stage of decomposition. However, it was clear that Kyra and Belker were accustomed to this matter, and that they were professionals in hiding all traces, and no one could figure out what they had done. The police officers at that time were looking for Kyra and Belker everywhere, but there was no trace of them, and it was clear to them that they had fled as soon as they felt that the police were looking for them. At the same time, the police officers began to take Kyra's mother in for questioning. The mother at that time was terrified and distraught and couldn't put 2 words together. However, the police officers confronted her with the fact that they knew the whole truth, but her situation would be much better if she confessed to them exactly what she had witnessed. Kyra's mother told them that she had witnessed the incident in which Abdelnour's life was ended, and he was buried in her daughter's house, and that this was done by her son, her daughter, and her daughter's husband. Also, through the statements she made, she stated to the police officers that this was not the first time, and that they had done these things in front of her more than once, and that they had ended the lives of some people in the house. When the police officers asked her where these people were, whether they were buried under the ground of the same house, at that time, the mother stated to the police officers that she had no idea where her daughter and her husband had disposed of the bodies of the previous victims. Of course, when these details were revealed in social media and in the media, they caused a great uproar throughout Algeria, and everyone couldn't believe how people could commit such horrific acts. In addition, some people felt real fear because 2 serial killers were completely free, and their whereabouts were unknown, and it was unknown whether they would stop at this point. While the police officers were literally turning Algeria upside down to look for Kyra and Belker, and there was no trace of them, a report came to them from a person who worked in agriculture. He told them that while he was walking his dogs in an area called Karouba village, the dogs headed towards a specific area and began to bark and try to dig. At that time, he suspected that something was buried under the ground, and from his point of view, he immediately had to go and report the matter to the police. The police officers moved immediately after the report and went to the area that the person who made the report had identified for them. When they arrived there, they had police dogs with them. The dogs also headed to the same area and began to bark and try to dig. Here, the police officers decided to dig in this area. They continued to dig until they reached a very deep level, and there they found some remains and human bones. They were certain that these bones did not belong to one person, but to more than one person. And what became clear to the police officers from the skeletal structure of the bodies they found in the pit was that they belonged to 3 people. And this confirmed the confession that Kyra's mother had made, that they had ended the lives of more than one person previously and got rid of them, and she doesn't know where they got rid of them. Also, if you remember at the beginning of the story, I told you that when Abdelnour's family went to file the report, there were 3 previous reports with the police officers who couldn't determine where their owners had gone. This showed the police officers that Kyra and Belker had ended the lives of 4 people completely. The task before the police officers at that time was to transfer the bodies of the 3 victims they found in the pit to the forensic medicine and ask the families who had filed reports of their children's disappearance to go there and provide a DNA sample in order to match it with the victims and see if these bodies belonged to their children or not. Indeed, the DNA result came back to them confirming that the 3 bodies they found belonged to the young men whose disappearance had been reported by their families previously. Of course, at that time, the only task for the police officers was to locate Kira and Belcaire and arrest them. Of course, when they started publishing their pictures, some reports started reaching the police officers from some people who said that they had spotted or seen them in a certain area. The last thing the police officers were able to find out was that the 2 of them had rented a car and headed to the state of Annaba, and after that, no one knew where they had gone. While the police officers were trying to find any trace of them, a new report reached them. This report was about a horrific accident that occurred on one of the roads. During this accident, 2 cars collided strongly, and one of the people in the private car died. When the police officers arrived there and started to see what had happened, they discovered that the private car involved in the accident was the car that Belcaire had rented and used to go to the state of Annaba. They also confirmed that the person who died in the accident was Belcaire himself. It was as if fate had caught up with him. He was fleeing from the police officers so that they wouldn't arrest him and so that he wouldn't be punished for his horrific actions. However, God Almighty decided to issue his just judgment on him, and his life ended inside the car he was trying to escape in. It became clear to the police officers at that time that Kira was not in the car with Belcaire when the accident happened. The accident happened in an area called Sétif. It became clear to the police officers that as soon as they arrived in the state of Annaba, each of them went in a different direction so that if one of them was arrested, the other wouldn't be arrested with them. The task of the police officers at that time was to locate Kira and arrest her. After a week of searching for her everywhere, they received a report from a person who informed the police officers that he had seen Kira in the city of Mohammadia. The police officers moved to the city of Mohammadia and were able to surround Kira, and she couldn't escape from them this time. They arrested her and took her to the police station to find out her story exactly, and to find out from her why all these things were happening, and whether there were other people involved with her in the matter or not. The first thing Kira learned after arriving at the police station was that her husband, Belcaire, had been in a road accident and died. Of course, when Kira heard this, she broke down completely and was crying over her husband and beloved. She couldn't believe all the details they were telling her. At the same time, the police officers didn't have time to waste with Kira while she was still going to sit and grieve and cry over her husband. They began to confront her with all the evidence they had against her, that she and her husband had ended the lives of 4 people, in addition to the confessions given by her brother and her mother. Here, Kira realized that there was no room for denial and decided to sit down with the police officers and tell them about the motives and reasons why she and her husband had decided to form a criminal gang that would target and lure some victims in order to rob and plunder them and then get rid of them. Kira told the police officers that at the beginning of her marriage, she and Belcaire were very happy together, and their financial situation was somewhat good. However, as the years passed, their financial situation worsened more and more. They sat together and began to think about how to improve their financial situation. Instead of looking for a job or travel or anything to invest a sum of money in, they decided to think in a different way, completely out of this world, by targeting some victims, trying to swindle them and then take all their money and all their possessions and leave, and then flee. However, they did this once or twice, and one time there was almost exposed because some people were able to realize what they were doing or trying to do, and they were afraid that their secret would be revealed one day. Kira came up with the idea that the person who would enter their house would never leave the house again. Their life would be ended, all their money would be taken, and no one would know anything. Kira said that the way they used to lure their victims was by offering some goods that they claimed were imported from abroad, and these people would go to buy them. This matter wasn't real at all. Kira deliberately used to put pictures of herself on her Facebook account to convince some people that she was financially well off and for them to gain trust in her when they came, and no one would suspect anything about her. As soon as these people entered the house, they would immediately attack them, end their lives, and then get rid of them. Kira said that all their victims were disposed of outside the house, except for Abdel Noor, whom they decided to bury inside the house. The police officers at that time asked her the question, where did the belongings of the people whose lives they ended go? Kira began to indicate to them that the matter was not limited to her and Belcaire. nor even to her brother Tariq. 9 other people were involved with them in the matter, and Kira began to point them out to the police officers one by one. Some of them would lure some people to their house, some people would take the victims' belongings and sell them, and some would try to take them, bury them, and get rid of them. Each person had a role. Here it became clear to the police officers that they were not dealing with 1, 2, or even 3 people. They were facing a literal criminal gang, and this gang was being run by Kira and Belkair. They were the masterminds behind all the horrific acts that were being committed. Through the confessions provided by Kira and the evidence she gave to the police officers about the places where they could find the people who were involved with her, their number was 9. The police officers were able to arrest them one after the other. The charges that were being directed at the criminals were countless: luring, theft, robbery, mutilation of bodies, burying corpses, in addition to multiple murder charges. Of course, when the public heard all these details, they were in a state of outrage, to the extent that the Algerian public prosecutor issued a statement to try to calm the public opinion. In the criminal gang, each person was specialized in their action. The individuals fully involved in the crimes were Tariq, Kira, and Belkair, who died in the accident. As for the other individuals, they were involved but to varying degrees, and each of them will be tried according to the charges against them. Currently, all the criminals are awaiting their trial, and up to the moment I am recording this video, the verdict has not been issued against them. The details of this case illustrate the extent of treachery and evil that can be inside some people, and no one has any idea about it. The strange thing, and what perhaps caught my attention in the details of the story, is that when Kira and Belkair were doing these things, we can say that they were both controlling each other's thinking and were helping each other. But Tariq, Kira's brother, in addition to her mother, how could they accept these situations? Why were they silent? Why didn't they object to what she was doing? They were participating in the matter, and no one was telling her that what they were doing would lead to a major disaster that they would never be able to get rid of. They always used to say that everyone has their share in life, but instead of trying to solve their financial crises and problems by starting any project or finding any solution, Kira and Belkair decided at that time to establish the Kira and Belkair Evil Gang. And with that, we have reached the end of our story. Thank you for watching. If you like this type of content, don't forget to hit subscribe button and activate the bell to receive all the new updates. Stay tuned for next episode. See ya.